There are forces that govern without announcing themselves, that shape decisions without being seen, that control outcomes while remaining invisible. Not through violence, not through coercion, just through a quiet, persistent presence that makes certain choices feel inevitable, while others become impossible. This is the story of a perfume that ruled, not dramatically, not obviously, who steadily, quietly, until a man's entire existence had been shaped by something he wore every day, but never truly noticed. Until every major decision had been influenced by an invisible force he'd invited onto his skin. This is the story of the perfume that quietly ruled his life, and how he never even knew he was being governed. His name was Victor, 47 years old, an investment banker at a firm where control was currency and autonomy was status. He made decisions that moved millions, advised clients on risk, managed portfolios with cold precision. His professional identity was built on being in control, on making choices, rather than having choices made for him. His personal life reflected that same philosophy. Everything measured, everything deliberate. He'd been married once, but was divorced now. The marriage had ended because he couldn't surrender enough control to allow an actual partnership. He had needed to govern every variable, unable to share authority. She'd left, not because he was cruel, but because living with him meant living under management, rather than beside an equal. He lived alone in an apartment that felt more like a command center than a home. Glass, steel, clean lines, everything visible, everything controllable. No clutter, no surprises, no element he hadn't personally selected and positioned. His life was an architecture of control. Every detail governed, every outcome predicted, and he wore the same cologne for 15 years. A high-end designer brand, expensive, prestigious, the kind of scent that announced status without being obvious about it. He'd selected it carefully, had tested alternatives, and had chosen the one that best represented who he wanted to be perceived as: successful, controlled, powerful. But the bottle ran out. Finally, after 15 years of the same morning ritual, after thousands of applications, after becoming so associated with that scent that colleagues could identify his presence before even seeing him, the bottle was empty, and his usual brand had been discontinued, reformulated. The exact scent he'd worn for a decade and a half no longer existed. He should have been prepared. He should have stockpiled, should have anticipated this possibility. But he hadn't. The discontinuation had been sudden. No warning, no time to secure a backup supply. For the first time in 15 years, he faced a morning without his scent, without the olfactory component of his carefully constructed identity. He went to his usual boutique, explained the situation. The consultant was apologetic. The brand had reformulated everything. The new version wasn't the same. Would he like to try alternatives? Victor tested dozens. Nothing felt right. Nothing matched. Everything was too sweet, too aggressive, too different from what he'd worn, from what he'd been. He left frustrated. Returned the next day. Tried more options. Still, nothing. The scent that had been part of his identity for 15 years was irreplaceable. On the third day, a different consultant approached him. An older woman. She had been watching him test fragrances, had noticed his frustration. She didn't work there regularly, was just covering for someone. She had a perspective the younger consultants lacked. "You're looking for control," she said. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. "I'm looking for what I used to wear." "No. You're looking for what it made you feel," which was control. "But what if you found something different? Something that gave you a different feeling? Something you might need more than control?" Victor was annoyed. He didn't need philosophy. He needed cologne. He needed a replacement. He needed to restore his routine. But the woman was already reaching for a bottle from a back shelf. Something he hadn't tested, something that hadn't been offered. "This is unusual," she said. "Most men won't try it. It's too subtle. Too quiet. Too unlike what they think they want." She opened Italiano, "But you seem tired. Like controlling everything has become exhausting. Like maybe you need something different, even if you don't know it yet." The scent was nothing like what he'd worn, nothing like what he'd been testing. It was quiet, understated. Something that whispered rather than announced. Something that felt like a release rather than an assertion. Something that smelled like permission to stop governing every single variable. He should have refused. Should have insisted on finding a closer match to his original. Should have maintained his search for control, but something about that scent made him curious. Made him wonder what it would feel like to wear something different. To project a different presence. To give up the constant assertion of control his previous scent had represented. He bought it. Told himself it was temporary, just until he found a proper replacement. Just an experiment. Not a permanent choice, not a surrender of his identity. Just a practical solution to an immediate problem. He wore it the next day, applied it the same way he'd applied his previous cologne. Same locations, same ritual. But the effect was completely different. Where his old scent had announced his presence, this one simply existed. Where the previous cologne had demanded attention, this one invited it. Where control had been the message, now the message was something softer. Something he didn't have the language for. At work, people responded differently. Not dramatically. Just slight shifts. His assistant asked for his opinion instead of waiting for directives. His junior colleagues suggested ideas rather than waiting for approval. Meetings became conversations rather than presentations to his authority. The hierarchy he'd so carefully maintained began softening. People treated him more like a collaborator than a commander, he noticed, but didn't immediately connect it to the scent. He attributed it to organizational changes, to people becoming more confident, to the natural evolution of team dynamics. He didn't consider that his own signal had changed. That the olfactory message he broadcast had shifted from control to collaboration. From authority to accessibility. Weeks passed. The bottle of his original cologne remained unfound. The new scent became his default. The temporary solution became his routine. And his life continued shifting, subtle changes accumulating. His relationships evolved. Clients began sharing their real concerns rather than just seeking directives. Friends called more often. Then, his ex-wife reached out, asked if they could talk. She said she'd noticed something different about him. Said he seemed less in need of governing every conversation, more willing to just be present without managing the outcome. He should have been alarmed, should have recognized he was losing control, should have returned to searching for his original scent and restored the authority that had defined him. But he didn't. Because something about the new scent made resistance feel unnecessary. It made control feel optional rather than essential. It made him willing to see what happened if he just stopped governing every single variable. 6 months after finding the new cologne, Victor's life was unrecognizable, not in obvious ways. The structure remained similar. He still worked at the same firm, lived in the same apartment, had the same routines. But the quality of everything had changed. His job felt less like a battle for dominance and more like a creative collaboration. His relationships felt less like negotiations and more like genuine connections. His apartment still had clean lines, but now it also had signs of life. Books left open, coffee cups on tables, evidence that someone actually lived there, rather than just managed the space. His ex-wife visited. They talked. Actually talked. Not the careful verbal chess they'd played throughout their marriage. It was a real conversation. About regrets. About patterns. About how he'd needed to control everything because being vulnerable felt dangerous. About how the cologne he'd worn had somehow reinforced that. Had been part of his armor. Part of his system of control. And losing it had been the crack that let something different emerge. "You smell different," she said at one point. "I can't explain it. But it's like you're here. Actually present, not just managing the interaction." He realized she was right. The new scent wasn't just a different fragrance. It was a different message, a different signal, a different way of being in the world. And it had quietly governed his choices, not by forcing him anywhere, but by making certain options feel natural that had felt impossible before. It made vulnerability feel acceptable. It made surrendering control feel like a possibility rather than a threat. But then something else happened. He tried going without the scent. Just to see. Just to test whether the changes were his, or whether they were chemically mediated. He went 3 days, and he felt the old patterns returning. The need to control, the inability to be vulnerable, the defensive armor reasserting itself. By the 3rd day, His assistant commented that he seemed tense, that the collaborative atmosphere in the office was evaporating. He reapplied the scent on the fourth day, and within hours, he felt the shift back. He felt control becoming optional again, rather than compulsory. He felt the softer version of himself re-emerging. He understood then. The scent wasn't just a fragrance, it was a chemical governor. An invisible ruler shaping his choices, making certain behaviors feel natural and others feel difficult, not forcing him, not controlling him obviously, just quietly influencing, subtly guiding, making collaboration feel easier than domination, making openness feel safer than defense. He was dependent. The changes he'd thought were his were actually mediated by the cologne. Without it, he reverted. With it, he transformed. The governor wasn't inside him. It was in a bottle on his bathroom counter, an invisible force he applied every morning. A quiet ruler he'd invited into his life without understanding what he was inviting. A year after finding the new cologne, he tried to identify it, to understand what it was. He sent a sample to a lab and got results that made no sense. Compounds that shouldn't work together. Molecular structures that shouldn't be stable. It was as if the cologne existed outside of normal chemistry. As if it was designed for a purpose beyond simply smelling good. He went back to the boutique, looking for the consultant, the older woman who'd given it to him. She no longer worked there. She had only been covering temporarily. No one remembered her. There was no record of her employment. It was like she'd appeared specifically to give him this bottle, and then disappeared once her purpose was complete. He searched for the brand, found nothing. The bottle had minimal labeling. No manufacturer listed. No ingredients disclosed. Like it was a private creation that existed specifically for him. Like an invisible ruler had been custom designed to govern his specific tendencies. His life continued transforming, but now he saw it clearly. He saw that every choice was being influenced, that the perfume was quietly ruling, making decisions by making certain options feel natural and others feel difficult. He'd traded obvious control for subtle governance. He had surrendered his authority to an invisible force he couldn't even identify. His ex-wife noticed his awareness. "You've realized," she said during one of their increasingly frequent meetings, "that you're being influenced, that the changes aren't just you." Yes. Does it matter? He didn't have an answer, because the life he was living now, less controlled, more vulnerable, more connected, was better than the life he'd lived before. Even if it was chemically mediated, even if the perfume was quietly ruling, even if his choices weren't entirely his own. "What if this is who you actually are?" she asked, "and what you wore before was the real influence? What if the cologne you wore for 15 years made you more controlling, more defended, more unable to connect? What if that was the governor? And this is just revealing what was always underneath." The question stayed with him, because he couldn't know. He couldn't separate what was authentic from what was chemically induced. He couldn't determine whether his previous cologne had made him controlling, or whether this new one was making him collaborative. He couldn't identify which version was the real him, and which was the governed self. All he knew was that he couldn't stop wearing it. He tried twice more to go without. Each time, the old patterns returned. The defensive armor rebuilt itself. Control became compulsive again, and he felt himself becoming someone he no longer wanted to be. So he kept wearing it, kept being ruled by it, kept living a life that was governed by an invisible force. Better governed than he'd governed himself, perhaps, but governed nonetheless. The perfume ruled quietly, never obviously, never forcefully, just by making vulnerability feel safer than defense, making collaboration feel easier than control. And he submitted, not because he had to, but because not submitting meant returning to a life that had been more controlled but less alive, more defended but more isolated. The perfume that quietly ruled his life taught him that sometimes surrender to an invisible force is freedom, that being governed by something you don't understand can be a liberation from governing yourself too tightly, that control isn't always power. Sometimes it's a prison, and sometimes an invisible ruler knows better than your conscious mind what you actually need. He still wears it. Every day, he watches the bottle slowly empty and wonders what will happen when it runs out and he can't find a replacement. He still questions whether he's actually changed or is just being changed. But he keeps applying it, keeps being ruled, because the alternative is returning to ruling himself. And he's learned that he rules too harshly, governs too strictly, controls too completely. Better to be quietly ruled by something gentle than to rule himself into isolation. The perfume governs. He submits, and between those two facts is the life he's living now. Less controlled, more vulnerable, more connected, more alive. Whether it's authentic doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that